comencem ja la darrera sessió, l'última sessió, la sessió número 10, amb el títol El futur de la mobilitat urbana. Per parlar d'aquest tema, demano que entri a l'escenari el senyor Alain Flausch, exsecretari general de la UITP i assessor sènior a Assessor de Little Benelux Brussel. Hello.
Thank you.
El senyor Flausch exposarà els resultats d'un estudi que s'ha realitzat per la consultora internacional Assessor de Little sobre com es comparen 80 ciutats del món en intentar assolir un nivell raonable de mobilitat sostenible combinant modalitats de transport tan clàssiques com de noves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I don't know whether it's still the morning, but so my name is Alain Flausch. Indeed, I'm a Belgian citizen, but with kind of an international mindset because I've been traveling the world around mobility for ages. I'm also a former operator because I've been heading the Brussels transit system for 11 years. So for those who operate here, we are brothers to some extent. Now I'm retired, but I'm still consulting for Assessor de Little, who you know is an international consulting firm. And I guess I've picked up this firm because they have an excellent transport practice. And that's why I'm working as a kind of a senior advisor, which is a part-time job. And I had the pleasure, because I have a special attraction to the Catalonia, to come here when I was invited. And I thank very much the organizer for having me here. The idea is indeed to mix two things: the result of a study that we made, but also a vision on how the future of mobility might be. We need to be extremely cautious because, as you know, there's still a lot of questions, and we'll go through those questions. Now, the question starts from there. On the left side, you have New York in 1900. And at that time, you see there is some car, one car, but most of the cars are driven by horses. 13 years later, there's only cars and one horse. So in 13 years, there has been a dramatic change. Are we in such a situation today? That's the point of my presentation. Now, for those who know transport and know some sociology, you know what I'm showing on this slide is not really new. But as you know, we have, as consultants, but also as academics, we need to take into account mega trends and trends that are more on our side. So urbanization, everybody knows about it. We've tipped off 50%, but we in Europe are above 50% for a long time. Digitalization. Individualization, we heard a lot this morning, how people now are less collective than they used to be. That's why public transport is facing a big challenge. And of course, sustainability, which is today very much a hot issue all over the world, but especially in Europe. In terms of societal and behavior, we are now really bad boys or bad girls because we do want to have everything immediately. You know, it needs to go speed and service. We're no longer very much interested by industry, which is a pity, I believe, but everything must come as a service. Of course, the shared economy is now influencing the young generation. We want it green. And of course, our lifestyle. My kids don't have a car, which was unbelievable some years ago. And they just, and even in the US, because I studied over there, I remember when I was studying there, by 16, all youngsters would go immediately to get their license for driving. Today it's 25 years, which shows how in many places in the world, even in America, which is the world of the car, change are rapid. Of course, AV, autonomous, everybody wants connectivity, energy, green energy, and speed, which is also, we're so spoiled that, you know, when we don't get on our device an immediate answer, we just kind of cry and shout. We hate the idea that it takes 2 seconds because we're so used to this. That is, of course, explaining why the old public transport, which is very, I visited the first FGC station and train here in Catalonia. I mean, it's ingrained in our life, but we are facing now things that are going much faster than we used to be, and that is our challenge. Now, if we try to organize this, all those trends are providing new mobility solutions. It looks very simple, of course, but if you connect connectivity with everything as a service, obviously something is possible. Shared economy, connected is, of course, connectivity is of the essence if you want to have this. Autonomy combined with this. And all this, you can make a square and see that all those new trends are allowing different mode of mobility. You know them very well. On the short distance, you know all the players. These are international players. When it's a bit longer, you see Uber, Careem. You have Zipcar, BlaBlaCar for longer trips. So there are already lots of players all over the world that are trying to fill up the gap for this new disrupting technology. And that is a real paradigm change, is that mobility is no longer a physical issue. Mobility can be now seen as an information service with physical transportation, of course, which is the essence. But basically, it's thinking about outside the box. That is putting the paradigm in a different way, and to say we see this as a service, and the various provider of transportation would plug in this new service. As any consultant, we're starting, where are we standing? And that's what our study. First of all, we looked at congestion. Strangely enough, Madrid and Barcelona are not in the ranking, which is good news for you. But basically, when you see the worst city of the world, you have Istanbul and Moscow. I have a personal story about this. I remember when I was UITP Secretary General, I once decided to go to Moscow for one day. And I landed in one of the airports there at 7 o'clock in the morning. It took me 2 hours to go to the hotel to take a shower because I had slept in the flight. Then I got 15 minutes to take my shower. Then to go to the meeting, which I had with the metro people of Moscow, took me another 2 hours. We had an hour of discussion and then decided to go to some exhibition in the south of Moscow. It took us another 2 hours of car, always on the car. 1 hour on the exhibition, and then at 3 o'clock they told me, you got to go back to the airport because it's going to take you 4 hours to go. So that means I spent nearly 11 hours of that day in the car because of traffic congestion. So it's really, when you remember, if you were heading a sales team and you tell them, you got to go and have 5 appointments a day, in Moscow it's strictly impossible. And that's how you can calculate the cost of the congestion, because that means that everything is much more expensive, they have much more time than expected. Now, congestion is growing every year. These are numbers, of course, but basically it's 1.3 per year of additional congestion. So we kind of lose billions. And if you take cities like New Delhi in India, for instance, it would bring up to 8% of the gross national product of the New Delhi city per year of loss because of the congestion. We then made a study, which is the famous, what we call in our jargon, the Future of Urban Mobility Index. I tell you immediately, an index as such do not interest us very much. I know when I was at UITP, everybody wanted to know on which was the rank of Moscow, was the rank of Barcelona, and all this. But basically what we're trying to do is something a bit more smarter, which would be to try, first of all, to select 80 cities, which would be representatives of how the world is organized in terms of cities. You see the mega cities on the top by continent, then the world largest cities by the GDP share. You have another kind of, you can't miss Lisbon if you want to do something in Europe. Then small but innovative city like Portland, which is a very innovative, but also some Amsterdam, which is well known in Europe, and Zurich. And we went through a number of criteria. Let me immediately say that, of course, those criteria can be disputed. We tried to be as reasonable as possible, and of course the weight can also be disputed. But it was divided in three parts. The maturity of the system, is it innovative, the system, and are they delivering what they promise? And you see it's divided in a certain number of points, but you go to maturity, you would go through financial attractiveness of PT, the share of PT in modal split, all this. So all those criteria have been weighted. And indeed, what we want is that after, when the ranking is made, that each city could come back to those criteria and say, oh, where am I good? Where am I not good? And what should I do to leverage on the criteria where I'm not that good? And that gives this ranking. I tell you, we have been doing, in many of those cities, we have been doing some focus in trying to go on the performance. But basically, you see Madrid and Barcelona are nearly close to each other. I'll come back in a minute. But the winner, if I could say that, is Singapore, which everybody should recognize as being indeed a special place where with a special government, but which have been tackling the mobility issue with much more courage and braveness than any other city in the world. Of course, it's a bit of a dictatorship, so it must be a bit easier than in our democracy, where we have to take into account the reaction of our citizens. But basically, you can see also after that, Stockholm and Amsterdam are doing very well. And if you go to Stockholm, I invite you to come to the UITP World Congress that will take place in Stockholm in June. You will see that it's a very, very pleasant city because, first of all, public transport is very well organized. And second, cars has been nearly disappearing, so that walking in that city is really pleasant. You can look at all the numbers. You know, my city, Brussels, is not that good either. We're down compared to Madrid or Barcelona. And of course, you would go on the left side. That's where really they're just starting to organize. In Jakarta, they have nothing but buses. And they're starting to build a metro, and obviously Jakarta would be quite down the road. Now, what you should keep in mind is the top sentence. If you look at the winner, which you see would be Singapore, they are 59.3 out of 100. It means that there's a lot of improvement that's still possible. And look down, even in Helsinki, there's still a lot. So there is room for unleashing the potential and to improve this, which is a good challenge for the cities and the operators of public transport and other modes of transport, because it means they could still go further. And I was in Barcelona yesterday night. Obviously, traffic is okay, but at peak hour, it's still very congested. And I think we could, with the other mode of transportation you have in Barcelona, I think there is room for reducing the car traffic. If you go for that, you see Madrid compared to Barcelona. I'm not going to enter into this well-known rivalry between the two cities. Basically, they are in the same level. It's not a difference, except the performance is better in Barcelona. So you deliver more, and the modal split is better here. In terms of innovation, as you know, the Metro Madrid, for instance, is very innovative. It's very engineering-driven, and they have the rest for the maturity. It's basically the same. Now, the idea of this was to help operators in cities, public transport authorities, as we call them, to take advantage of their weakness and to work on those weaknesses. And I made a presentation to TMB some time ago, and to the mayor, to the Assessor for transport of Barcelona, to show that there are still things that can be done. But, okay, so you see there is no significant progress. Motorization level on a worldwide basis is still growing. There is a small decrease of the motorized individual transport, -2. Of course, on the edge, you see bike sharing has been booming. It's well known in Barcelona for a long time. So bike sharing and car sharing are doing well. But if you look in terms of market share, it's still very minimal in terms when you compare to public transport and to the car transport. Why this situation? There is, in the last sentence, in the last bullet, it should, I don't know, it's been corrected, good. So, a lot of major cities don't have a clear vision and strategy. That's the first point. It's not an easy task, I know, but there are a lot of cities that don't know where they go. My city, for instance, Brussels, is terrible. They just dropped for the first time a mobility plan, which is very ambitious, but I think it's more words than real act. Lack of integration. It's not true here. I came from the center of Barcelona, and I could notice that with my same ticket, I could use the metro and then later the bus that brought me here without any problem. But there is still a lot to do, I believe, in terms of integration. Lack of system-level collaboration and innovation, the customer needs. When Uber came up, I don't know what is the legal position in Barcelona about Uber, but I remember it started in London after they had won a big market check in the US. And it was immediately adopted by many Londoners because it is such a good service compared to their old black cab system. Unfortunately, it has now created additional congestion, but basically the needs of the client showed that with the traditional mode of transport, they're not very happy. So I think one of the real issue is to get our industry to be more focused on the client needs. And the combination, and we'll come that with mobility as a service, mobility as a service is a real good answer to those new needs. Our clients want to have an easy-to-use system where they can, with their apps, pick one system or the other without having to change tickets like it is here. So there are lots of cities in the world where it does not exist. So it makes all the mobility much more chaotic than it should be. And then players, but it may not be the case here, because you have an authority which is active for a long time. But basically in many cities of the world, the authorities don't bring players together. The players are playing their own turf, and they don't want to talk to the other. This is not the tradition here in Catalonia, but it is the case in many, many places. Let's also be realistic. You have on the left the prognosis made by some large consultant about what would be the share of the new mobility in the modal split in 2035 or 30. When you see the different figures, I mean, nobody knows really, because if you have one that says without the Boston Consulting Group down there, they say from 16 to 98, that's not a prognosis. There's just nothing. Eventually, that you would come to 30% is not unrealistic. But also, we would have some benefits. That's how they have calculated. The new mobility would help us to reduce our commuting time by 30%, to reduce our emission by 33% to 66%, eventually a big reduction. Less need for road infrastructure, which is a costly venture. The motorization would go down, but the figures are not really reliable, and the need for parking place. But also, it could have a detrimental effect. I think I saw this kind of same picture in a earlier presentation. That is, these piles of bikes. So, new mobility could also mean chaos, and so that's why the world regulators is so important. We are one of the difference that you can make between regulators all over the world. If the example of Land Transport Authority, which is based in Singapore, when this type of rumors about bikes, wild bike pile, came, they had already been in China to see how it was working,
And they had already a legislation ready when the first operator came. So they could come and go to those guys and say, hey, I've got a carrot and a stick. If you think that you can do this in Singapore, no way. So we're gonna negotiate, and they're very practical, pragmatic, negotiate how you will operate and what will be your duty and what we will provide you. And so this is the type of thing that regulators in Europe should learn, is that instead of waiting for things to happen, they should anticipate. They could send their civil servant to see what's happening elsewhere and to prevent things to happen of that kind, because new mobility could also mean chaos. As a good consultant, we have to identify uncertainties, because if we knew, we would have found the solution very early. There's a lot of uncertainty on how people will adopt the new mobility solution. We have sometimes, you remember the year 2000, the euro, that was a major worry for everybody. We have been working like hell that year 2000 when it was tipping from 1999 to 2000. All engineers were worried, and it went smoothly. So eventually, people will adopt, like they adopt the automated train in TMB on Line 9 here. Nobody really cared about having no driver. I mean, it's in one day it was gone. But maybe AVs, where you'd be in the city with with three other person, and the car would drive between pedestrian and all this, that may take a bit longer. Mobile ownership model, everybody owns his car today, a large majority. Do we accept to abandon this? Kids of the new generation do. They don't care. If they jump in a car, they don't want to own it. And I guess the manufacturing industry is about to understand this. The deployment of autonomous technologies, I think there has been a buzz the last 3 years saying that will come anytime. In fact, now you listen to the manufacturing industry for cars, they say level 3 maybe, but level 5 is going to take us another 10 years at least. And I guess it will start with fleet, they say. So you see also there that we are depending on the evolution of technology. New source of energy. Everybody knows that if everybody had an electric car, the whole system would collapse, because we don't have today the capacity to produce what would be needed by the fleet of cars that we own. New roles in the new ecosystem, new actors. Because I was coming from the operator side, from public transport, for years I've been pleading for operators to be more agile, to decide to diversify. Running only train and bus is no longer enough. If you really want not to be left aside, and that picture came from, you know, that Helsinki was one of the first systems where mobility as a service has been introduced. And when you look at the map, you see that many small players have the same size that the public transport side. And that shows what you could be, very isolated. Even if in terms of volumes of passengers, you are much bigger. On the map for a client, he picked up whatever it is they're open to take. And I think operators of public transport should be changing their philosophy. We'll come in a minute. Value sharing between actors, but we know that because we have been rate integration, tariff integration, as well known now here in Barcelona, also in Germany, and the performance durability. So it's a lot of questions that needs to be answered if we want to go somewhere. Two messages. One is for the authorities. We use the house as a way to build the whole thing. Of course, the mobility funding is a major task of the authority. They have to develop the visionary strategy and governance, which is something which here, I guess, in Barcelona, view from outside, is not an issue, because there has been, for a long time, you have an authority that have been thinking about it. I'm not up to date to the last thinking and how the the majority of the, in Barcelona is viewing the future. But then it's easy. You have on one side a mobility supply, on the other side a mobility demand, and you have to organize what we call smart mobility, which will be the mobility as a service. And we'll come to the different model, but basically what it is suggesting is that the regulator takes the lead in terms of mobility service. For the operator, the first thing to do is the sense of purpose. Who, how, we. That's just, I was touching a minute ago, say, what do we want to do? Do we want to continue to run trains and buses? Or do you want to complement or offer? Or do we want to partner with some of the new mobility players? This is something which is very important, because as long as this is not clear, you cannot develop a strategy if you don't know where you want to go and what kind of role you want to play in this new ecosystem. Then, of course, operational excellence, it's still a major issue, because our major public transport systems are too expensive. You have, of course, to focus on your customer. It's something which is obvious today, but which was not 20 years ago, and I'm not sure always that is ingrained in companies that are more engineer-driven than by customer. On the right, the number 4 is ecosystem integration. That's all the partnership, all the type of partnership that you can build to become a part of the whole ecosystem. And eventually, the roadmap to this has to be successfully managed. So it's a tremendous effort that operators, traditional operators, have to do today. And I would think that for the new player, the new mobility player, what they should is to try to keep their competitive edge. They should be lean, they should have as low cost as possible, and to be customer mind, they are generally, because they start generally from there, and to be open to this system integration. So, let's finish with the mobility as a service. The idea is to provide consumers with seamless, flexible, efficient, user-oriented mobility service. It ultimately follows a shift away from the personal ownership of individual toward the use of multimodal mobility solution consumed as a service. This is enabled by combining transportation from public and private transportation providers through an integrated mobility platform that creates and manages the journey, integrate planning, booking, ticketing, and payment. That's the 4 words. So it's planning, booking, ticketing, and payment on a one-stop shop principle. It's as easy as it said, it's so difficult to do. You have 3 models for this. You have on the left, I would say, the old-fashioned model, which would be the automatic attitude of the most traditional player from the past. If you look at some of those big railway companies, because they are big and powerful, they say, we're going to organize this around us. And our odds is that, or expectation is that it will not work. I'm seeing right now that many, like the SNCF in France, is trying to do this. They're trying to be the integrator. But it's no longer the way it is. I know in the past they were integrating everything. You remember all our railway company were building trains. They have now abandoned, to some extent, building trains. And they understand that their core business is not building trains and should be more focused on serving, transporting customers. But it's still that tendency to go this way. On the middle model, it is the private system, which I believe also is a bit unbalanced. It's the example of Helsinki. Basically, there is a smart entrepreneur in Helsinki that's been creating a platform, and it's a free market organizing. Everybody can plug with him. The danger is that at some point in time, remember, we are generally in a city, and there is no reason why the private world should run a city. A city is first, let's say, belonging to its citizen. That means to its politician, because the politicians are basically being elected. And in all democracies, election is the best way to be in charge. and legitimate to run the city. And if you look at the US, where the private world has been running the show, the planning, for instance, in a city like New York is just impossible because they just follow the private world development. We are not used to this and we don't want this. And so this system, which has been developed by WIM, which is the name of the company, which is very fine, is privatizing everything. A platform is private, the ticketing, the paying is in the end of a company, which of course would want to make some money. And so you, as a transport provider, you would eventually be the victim of this. What we suggest is the model on the right hand, which is a combination of public regulation and free market development. The backhand would be first the result of a legal framework set up by the community, the public community, the public authority, that would force all players to provide their data. And we built a huge database where all the data of all suppliers would be stockpiled and would be treated in such a way as you could then plug on the front end, with the front end would be the interface with the customer, with any kind of application. And the best of application would win. If it's TMB application, why not? But it's basically because the client would have voted for the TMB application because it's the most user-friendly, the most easy to use, and so on. But basically, it would be this combination, we like it, after delete it, is because on the one hand, the regulator can say, okay, I want all the data there. I want them to be treated equally, not always like in Google, where it's always the people that pays that gets first on the first page. So everybody would have equal access. So the governance of that database would be in the end of the public. But after that, the plug-in, but even TMB could say, I want to plug in this database, and I'm going to offer to my customers the device or the platform which would allow them to go from me to FGC to a ride-hailing or to Uber and so on. And from my experience, and talking back to the Commissioner for Transport in London, who used to be my president at UITP, Peter Endy, he said to me, you know, we have used this, and I never used the TfL app. I always use one private app because it's much better. And I think if we believe that innovation is generally driven more by startup people, by people that are more creative than the public world, we should leave them to that, but at the same time to be sure that all the data are available and that they are, you know, in a framework which is fair for everybody. This is a system which is upstream, which is already existing in Austria, in Vienna, and which is coming to be sold because it's a package, it's a software package, basically, which runs the database, and then which is building some interface where you could plug your software if you want to develop one. And upstream mobility is already there. I don't know whether here in Barcelona anybody has been speaking with them, but what I'm sure of is that the people of Vienna, which was decided by the Vienna public transport company, but they open it totally to the private world, and it's a very fair but very well-regulated system. Now, we are not the only one that needs to go and cooperate. There are plenty of other sectors where it works. I've just listed some. But in all the sectors, look at telecom and electronics, the roaming. We all use roaming all the time when we travel. In fact, at the beginning, the telecom company were very much isolated and nationally driven. They came to a system where they exchanged with each other all the time, automatically. So collaboration for them, and they have, generally I'm recommending to public transport people to hire people from that sector because they have 10 years of advance on us in terms of networking. They know how to network. And if you want people to able to network and to partner, you could find some of those people that are in the telecom industry. But you could, see in many other sectors that it is absolutely of the essence, where there's new players, and so new players means new way of working, and the experience that we can get from other sector would be extremely useful. Some takeaways at home. I think I'm afraid it's a strategic issue, and many cities haven't yet dedicated enough efforts to work on the strategic issue. There is a lot of potential, if you keep that in mind, a lot of potential. It means if you are a little bit of an entrepreneur for a major company, it's a fantastic opportunity to develop your business and not to be set aside in the year to come. You have to reinvent yourself to some extent and be able to see differently the way to collaborate. The authority must play a big role. It's also a question mark because you don't have authority that are innovative all over the world, but they should foster collaboration and make that primary job, which is regulate and make a legal framework of that new mobility. And of course, a bit of creativity and of courage is always of use. I think that's it. So this was kind of our vision. We are helping a lot of city and operators to try to find their way. Even IT companies, they don't know where to go. The people that you know and that are providing you with planning tool, with a ticketing device and things of that sort, they say, where do we want to go now? Because we're feeling that the world is changing. Can you help us doing it? So we have, it's only a superficial presentation of what we can do, but I don't mark advertising for Arthur de Little, but I think at some point in time, you need to think about the future of our company. The challenge of mobility is so huge for our citizens that it's kind of a duty. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senyor Flausch, thank you. No sé si algú vol fer alguna pregunta, alguna consideració al senyor Flausch. Aixequin la mà, sisplau. Sí, mira, allà. Some questions. You have the translation? Do you have the translate? No? So...
Don't worry.
faràs la pregunta en anglès?
En anglès.
Perfecte.
In English. In your opinion, you said the question mark about the authorities, and which do you recommend? A bottom-up strategy or a top-down strategy? Because at the end of the day, public transport in many of the countries are regulated by authorities. So there are some public transport companies that they are leading the way, and usually authorities are behind them. So again, in your opinion, which is the best strategy to deploy this? A bottom-up or a top-down?
I don't think there is a choice to be made between the bottom-up or the top-down. I think the right answer would be an equal, permanent conversation of the authority and the operators. Authorities, from time to time, are far from the market. Even the CEO of operators are far from the market. And I always recommend that when you build a strategy or that you go and speak to your drivers, because they know plenty of problems that you don't know. They are coping with this every day, but they could, from time to time, easy solution can be found by talking half an hour with your driver. They say, you do this and this, and that's done. So remember the French, the Parisian situation. RATP is a huge body, 40,000 people, thousands of engineers, and they were ruling the market. After certain years, the idea was to have a partner, and the partner is now Île-de-France Mobilité, who started with 5 engineers, and they're now 500. And they went through negotiation of management contract and all this, and after 3 or 4, now they consider each other equal. Of course there is some fight because, you know, it's negotiation. But they understand at RATP that you need to be two to tango. And I think that's, for me, the best option is that you have a strong authority, which is not a bureaucratic one, but which is an agile one, and 500 people for Paris, I guess, is still agile. And by the same token, they have to listen to the operators because they would be much more too isolated. So it's a duo, and that's why I was pleading also for cooperation. The confrontation doesn't lead us very much. At some point in time, on the financial side, it's always a bit of a mismatch, but because we want more and they don't have it. But I do believe that there are places, and I had the feeling that in Catalonia or in Barcelona, there was some sort of a good understanding between the different authority and the different player. Now, of course, the political background is not always favorable, but I see, for instance, London is working very fine. TfL is a very smart organization. They are both operators and because the metro is operated by them, but for the rest, for the bus, they are just an authority. And from what I understand, and the people that I know there, it's not those lousy and lazy civil servants, are very smart executives. And so it's possible, and I would recommend it to be all over the world. If you go to LTA in Singapore, it's amazing how those people of LTA are good and expert, and how they dare taking, you know, having the first autonomous taxi. So it shows that it's not because you are on the public side that you are bad and lazy. They are very good public authorities. There are other in Brussels. Mine is terrible, but that's life. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.